My guest on today's episode is Elizabeth Lyons. She's the host of the Write the Damn Book Already podcast. And I first discovered her doing some research for somebody else that will be on the show. But I so much enjoyed her podcast that I had to have her on here so you guys can hear a little bit about her process of editing and getting books out into the world. Elizabeth is the author of Enough and Write the Damn Book Already, which is a book form of her podcast, condensed and
intensified
for your reading pleasure. If you've been wanting to publish your first book, but you feel overwhelmed by everything that needs to happen, you can enroll in Elizabeth Lyons' Publish the Damn Book Already self-publishing course using the code AUTHOR25 for a 25% discount. I'll have more details on that in the show notes if you're interested. And now, please enjoy my conversation with Elizabeth Lyons. I started to suspect that advertising through Meta is most effective if you have built something maybe robust organically. And so I'm curious, I don't know if you have a ton of thoughts here, but I wanted to open up to you and ask, I know that you've had some fairly good success with organic posts. And you mentioned in another conversation you had that they always seem to be the posts that are non-writer related. And so it's like, oh, great, I'll have one explode, but it didn't necessarily get my books or my message out to all of those people.
I do have some thoughts on this, not shockingly. I think that in many cases, as whether we're authors or we're product creators or we're course creators, like it doesn't matter if you're selling cars, like it doesn't matter. We get it in our head that it's an air quote bad thing if we post about something unrelated to what we do, like how we make money, and it gets a lot of traction. And we can tend to get a little bit disheartened by that, because we think no one's paying attention to the stuff that matters to me. In other words, what pads my bank account. But everyone wants to comment on the cute dog memes and the videos that are hilarious but serve no purpose. And I think there's a point to all of it. So a lot of it, I think what people don't recognize is as long as you're posting authentically, and I'm not someone who believes in posting for the sake of controversy or for the sake of getting attention, if it's outside of your brand. And for me, my brand is just me, right? So if I post, I try to keep it sort of in line so that people aren't like, what does she do? Like she's posting about knitting and then she's posting about books. But if it brings people in to where they feel like they're getting to know me better, I think they're more likely to pay attention overall. So I don't think it's a bad thing when completely unrelated posts do well. Furthermore, a like or a share or a comment is not an indicator of whether someone has parked you away in the back of their brain, right? So absolutely. I see posts all the time by people and I don't like it, but meaning I don't hit the like button, but I remember them and I look forward to seeing their stuff again. To come around though to your question about Meta and organic ads and things like that, having made so many mistakes in this space, I am now a relatively firm believer that if something isn't working in your ecosystem organically, it's not going to work very well if you start paying to push it out to the masses. So unless your ecosystem is off, like unless you look at your audience and you go, oh, my audience is full of gardening aficionados and or vegans, and I'm trying to sell meat. Well, then your organic posts aren't going to go very well with you need to switch up your audience.
Yes. Yeah, that's something I was thinking of as you were talking, is that my first experience of having social media work for me was on the platform formerly known as Twitter. I did really well there. I built up a large following quickly. And I thought when I was doing it that I was doing the right thing, because all of these people were authors and they were talking about books and publishing and things like that. And then I realized by the time I had gained some momentum and it felt like everything was going great, that it wasn't the right audience if I was out there to get readers. You've probably experienced this to a degree yourself. but authors aren't necessarily readers. I mean, they probably all read some, but a lot of them are not avid readers. And so this huge captured audience that really enjoys the stuff I'm doing and is interacting on a daily or multiple times a daily basis. But then when you put the call out to say, I've got a book out, crickets.
Right.
Have you seen that kind of thing?
I have, and sometimes it's not so much because they aren't readers as it is they're not readers of what you're putting out. So
Yes.
again, it's an audience misalignment.
Yeah.
Many people who purchase nonfiction say how to build a business, if it's business related, or how to understand meta ads. Those aren't the same people who are buying women's fiction in all cases.
Right.
So there's so many misconceptions about this word platform and like, where do we find our people? That's really what it boils down to, is where do we find our people? And the number of people who have said, well, I'd love for someone like Gary Vee or Brene Brown or insert whomever to promote my book, because then it would go gangbusters. My comment is, it probably won't, because you've written women's fiction and Gary Vee's audience is, for the most part, that's not what they're into or interested in.
Yeah. They're also, I mean, he's a proclaimed non-reader. He does not like to read. So in promoting a book, you're going to have a whole bunch of people who are like, huh? Yeah, that's a really good point. And it almost feels in some ways like you've read my mind, because I've had those thoughts more times than I'd like to admit, of like, if only so-and-so would give a shout to my book, it could change everything. That opens the door for my question of, what are the kinds of things within the social media world that you have seen work, that you've heard work, that people should be focusing on? And let's move past just the simple like consistency thing, because we all know we need to be consistent. We all know that kind of thing. And if you need to define brand, because you said like, I am my brand, that's always a great point of conversation as well.
Which do you want to tackle first?
Whichever you feel comfortable with, and then we'll branch out from there.
All right, let's go with brand first, because B is sooner in the alphabet. We'll just go alphabetically. So with brand in the author space, so often we are our brand. In other words, if, I write up until now nonfiction. I'm working on a novel now, but still there's a little debate about this, because people will say, in fact, I kind of got torn up on Threads about 3 months ago, because I was writing a listicle of things that are true when you're writing memoir. And one of the items was, you are your book. Like you've got to present in the same way on stage or in a coffee shop or on an interview as you do in your book. And someone who has an extremely large audience saw it in isolation, took it out of context, reposted it, and said, and this is a fiction writer, and said, no, you don't have to be your brand. That would mean I'm a serial killer and I'm a zombie and it was right. So we have to be careful about context. But for the authors with whom I work, who are writing pretty much predominantly either nonfiction, memoir, or women's fiction, they're not, when we meet them as people, we're often not surprised by who they are. Yes. Right? They're fun, or I don't meet a lot of very demure, because that's the word now apparently, very demure women who are writing about crazy psychotic stuff. I'm sure it happens. Right? Yeah. But it's so easy to just be yourself. And so that's really what I mean by you are your brand. It's so much harder to be like, well, in private, I've got to be this person. But the minute I show up on social media, I've got to be this bold, brash, extroverted, rich person in order to attract. Just be you. And it's the simplest thing, but it's hard for people to grasp, because it's sometimes hard to be ourselves and trust that people will be okay with that. It's easier to put on a mask and be something else.
Something I've thought a lot about, because this is a topic that's talked about quite a bit. And there is, if I'm being honest, there's a bit of confusion, because in order to be myself, I can't be thinking about myself. when I am thinking about me, then I am some filtered version of who I am. And so I think it's really tricky to be myself, because when I go on social media, then I'm already going to be in that kind of reflective place. The answer that's worked best for me, again, is consistency. Like the more that you do it, the less that you think of the mechanics and the more that you just sort of like fall into that space. But I'd be interested in your thoughts about like, how do you identify you authentically? And then when the audience responds to something, then do you go off and chase that direction because they like it? Or do you say like, that was less authentically me? So, I know I'm asking these big questions.
It's a brilliant question, Jody, really. And I think it's something that it's like, we don't realize that we're growing and evolving as people as we're figuring all these things out, because this is not something that I knew or was comfortable doing inherently, even some days still, but not on the regular until a few years ago. I think if we have to question what we're posting, right? And what we're chasing and why. I mean, I ask myself those questions all the time. So I think it comes down to self-awareness and a lot of introspection. If something does really well, I used to think, oh, I've got to post something else just like it. And and when I did that, it didn't go nearly as well. And one of the benefits, I too am tired of the like sort of the placating, like consistency. And the more you post, the more you realize it doesn't matter. Because you're not seen as often. What's the adage? Like, you wouldn't worry nearly as much about what people think of you if you recognized how infrequently they do.
That's one of my favorite things. In fact, I talked to my middle son about that a lot. Yeah.
And yet the flip side of that, Jody, is the one time you post something without thinking about it, it's like the vultures come in.
Yeah.
And you can lose the fear is you can lose your whole business over it, because people have.
Yes. I had a really, I'm going to call it tragic. It was an unfortunate situation. I made a post back in the Twitter days again, and I said something to the effect of novelists who are writing solely to entertain are failing their readers. And I still stand behind that, because I believe that a book needs to do more than be an escape, which is not to say that every book can't, be entertaining. They should all be entertaining, but there should be something deeper behind it. There was a well-known author who has a particularly vocal community on Twitter who saw that and said something pretty disparaging about me. And then his people piled on, and I lost my objectivity and decided to hit back, because I was like, this is uncalled for. But in doing that, I lost everything there, and he gained everything. But yeah, that moment where you didn't realize what was going to happen with what you considered to be a well-measured comment, there are real consequences for sure.
There really are. And the incident that I mentioned earlier that happened to me on Threads, I happened to be away on vacation, and I had done this thing where someone had encouraged me. Elizabeth, just take like a 2-day break from social media. Everything's going to be great. Well, I came back to, it was not good. And I don't know that I lost, it was a totally separate community from the community that I'm in every day, but it still felt terrible. It felt terrible. I mean, the things that people were saying to me, about me, the whole thing, and I couldn't have kept up if I tried in responding. So I just let it die, because I knew that by midnight that night, they'd be on to the next pylon. And sure enough, they were. There's a pylon in the author space a week on Threads, at least one.
Yeah. Now you have transitioned, and I remember you talking about this in a couple of interviews, that you've transitioned away from Twitter onto Threads. Can you talk a little bit about your reasoning and whether other authors should think about that? Should I think about kind of moving my presence away from Twitter toward Threads, stay where I already have an established community, and talk a little bit about the reasoning for that?
Yeah, it's another great question. So there are a few words that I don't utter. One is should, the other is must, need to, and have to. I just don't, because everybody's so different, Jody, right? Like, so what works for you isn't going to work for me, and vice versa. what I encourage my people to do is pick a platform. So I'm now actually not on what was formerly known as Twitter, nor am I on Threads. Mm-hmm. I personally found those platforms, you know, I had never, Twitter, back in the day, I did more on it, but I find that Twitter is really great if you are more interested in working with the traditional landscape of publishing, because there are a lot of agents on there, there are a lot of editors on there, you can get a lot of query questions answered. But a lot of those people have now left that platform because it's become something they don't want to be a part of, and they've gone over to Threads. I personally, this is just me, I find Threads to be borderline toxic.
Wow.
I just think, and it could be, I'm not speaking of it as a platform, but the space that I was in over there, I just felt like it was a lot of piling on. It was a lot of like one-upsmanship. I didn't feel the community that I was looking for. Yeah. I didn't feel, was it there on occasion? Absolutely. But I found myself dreading logging into Threads because I knew I was going to see either something unkind, I just didn't like it. So I focus on Instagram, but that doesn't mean everyone should be on Instagram. Sure. I like Instagram. And I am someone who used to be everywhere. And it was exhausting because by being everywhere, I was kind of nowhere. You know what I mean? Like, sure. I didn't really have a community anywhere. I was just bouncing from like room to room. Like, does anybody want to talk? You know, and I never established a community anywhere. So I think whatever works for people is what they should do. If you want to be in 20 places, be in 20 places. If you want to be in one place, don't fall for the idea that you can't be whatever your definition of successful is, only being in one place.
I had a gentleman on the show pretty recently, Ty Allen Jackson. He's a self-published children's author who is focusing on writing books for financial literacy for children and then just general literacy for children as well. And he's been able to sell more than 300,000 copies of his book. He's doing really well because he's self-published. You can probably extrapolate. He's made decent money doing it. And I think of those authors and basically like he's got an approach where he makes reels and he makes a specific kind of reel and it continues to hit for him and work well. His community understands it. And so I always look at that and I think about what you're saying, which is one platform is all you need to find your people, to speak to your people, and to take off and have really good success. For everybody like me who's out there thinking like, okay, I think I found my platform. I think Instagram works for me. I've done a lot of comparison between that and TikTok, and TikTok's algorithm has never gotten me. I find it really difficult to interact there. It's a strange place that is just like, it's supposed to be where everybody sells the most books, but I don't speak that language for some weird reason. But still on Instagram, I'm building, it's going, but you know, I haven't sold 300,000 books. I haven't sniffed out, 30, I don't think, from actual work that I've done on Instagram. What would you say to me and to people like me?
So a couple things. I mean, the most obvious is just keep going, right? But that's not super helpful. There are so many great, one of the things I try to look at it as all a big experiment that could go horribly wrong, but whatever. But look at it as a whole experiment. So when you watch other people, one of the greatest pieces of advice I heard last week, in fact, was look at what people who aren't in your space are doing on Instagram that draws you in. So if all the authors, there are a couple things that a lot of authors do, and this doesn't mean it's bad at all, but they all do it. Like, let's not use authors as an example. Remember there was the thing where you'd videotape your feet and you'd be walking and you'd do a reel over your feet walking, which I just did like 2 weeks ago, but everybody was doing it for a minute. So then the easy answer is, oh, that's the bandwagon. Like, that's the thing that's successful. But go look at what people who aren't in your space are doing that's compelling or that you find interesting and try it. Or if you like the feet walking thing, try it. And if it doesn't work for you, right, this is the challenge that comes up with, you can buy all kinds of Reels templates and they're great. I have a bunch of Reels templates to get you comfortable trying different things. But then over time, we all just have to figure out, first and foremost, what do I want to do?
Yeah.
Like, if you see me dancing, Jody, call someone. It's like, I need help. Like, it's a cry for help.
Yeah.
I'm not going to be that person. There were people when they were doing the voiceovers who would say to me, I'm not doing that. Do I have to do that? That seems to be really popular. No, you don't have to do it. Find something that you like to do that you're comfortable with, and just don't become attached to the immediate result. We're such an instant gratification society.
Very much. Yeah. So there's two ways I think about that. There's so many things that you touched on that I want to get to. So hopefully I don't lose train of thought, because you said so much good stuff right there. But a couple of them. One is as authors, there's a little bit less visually appealing about what we do than some other niches in Instagram. So I'm always drawn in by people who cook. I love watching cooking reels, people throwing stuff in the pan, splash, pow, boom, sizzle. It's so nice. And they've got the good voiceover, and they have just really tight video, and they're funny. And I'm like, literally, if I were to try to recreate that, but in writing, I'm just clicking on a keyboard, staring at a screen. There's not a lot of sizzle or pop there. So I wonder about that, but and I think I've started to understand some ways to make that kind of thing a little bit more interesting. Leaning into self-deprecation seems to work well for me right now. Yeah, but those are the kind of things where that you want to get the community, and you see some of the things that are working, and you think, how do I apply that specifically to this somewhat solitary, somewhat more quiet profession?
Yes. And it's not an overthinking thing. Some of the reels and the posts that I've made that have done the best are the ones I have thought about for no time. Like, one could argue, Elizabeth, should you have maybe thought about that? Maybe, but I didn't. Like, I'm taking B-roll, as they call it now, everywhere I go. So everywhere I am, it's like, oh, there's a background that I could use. A great author to follow for this her name's Mary Bell, and she writes women's fiction, romance. But this girl comes up with so many ideas of she's just experimenting all the time. And if it feels like it might be fun, she does it. Her book is set in Italy. So sometimes she's cooking Italian food and talking about being in Italy. Like, there are a lot of ways that we can get creative, but I agree with you. At first glance, it's like writing. How do you make that interesting? Yeah. And sometimes it's really just watch what some other authors are doing for inspiration, certainly not to copy it, but for inspiration, like, oh, okay, so my book is set in, let's say your book is, set in medieval times or something. I mean, you can find it doesn't have to be you sitting there writing.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's see. So I knew it would happen. I was trying to hold on to one other thing. I'm just gonna move away from it. It'll come back if it does. And thank goodness for editing too, by the way, because these moments where I have to recalibrate, you're like, this is not interesting for anyone. That does remind me of one question I wanted to ask too, though, is that when you're spending time focused on these things, like I love that idea of the book being set in Italy, and so you just do some Italian cooking and talk about the book. But what are the kind of things where you want to be cautious about developing an audience that's actually interested in what you're doing in terms of books? Do you need to be thinking about trying to sell books or get new readers with all of the content you create?
Well, do you need to? No, not with all of your content. So there are kind of like two different types of authors, right? We've got the authors who just write full time, like, or want to write full time, I should say, but that's all they do. They don't have courses. They're not coaches. They're not therapists, nothing. They're writing fiction. So in that case, I think that is a big component of, I think about like Breanne Randall, who's very well known for her first book, which the title is escaping me right now, but she came up with the hook that it was a combination of Gilmore Girls meets Practical Magic. So right in doing that,
I heard you
I don't
talk
think
about
she
her.
do you remember? And she just, she was traditionally published, but she waited 10 years to get that deal. And
Yeah.
she came out of the gate faster than anybody anticipated. She had thousands and thousands and thousands of pre-orders because she immediately pulled in everyone who likes Gilmore Girls and everybody who likes Practical Magic, and they got interested. Now, what was interesting on the backside, sadly, was there were some people who were like, I don't even get how this relates to Practical Magic. You're going to have that. You're going to have that.
Yeah.
And now she's on to her next one. But her focus is selling books. And then you have other people like myself. I'm selling books, but I'm also selling courses or programs. Yeah. Mary Bell is just selling books. Well, Mary has a course now too, a marketing course, but she's predominantly selling books. So I think when we put the pressure on ourselves to say, I've got to make a reel that sells 100 books. First of all, you're probably not going to know unless you have a direct link, unless you're running a meta ad, right? And you have a direct link, you're not going to know.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's nice to be, qualify that. It is helpful to be a person like me who I can run an ad and start to see books selling. And I'm proficient enough, thanks to Steve, at running an ad and selling some books and not losing my ass. But at the same time, like if I turn that ad off, all the book sales disappear. And so it's nice to be in a place where, go.
No, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I think we have like a slight delay, so I'm going to sound like an a-hole, like I'm just keep interrupting you, but I swear I'm not. I'm so glad you said that, because whether it's, and you don't have to run, ads are great. Like I'm working a lot with Amazon ads right now, and ads are great when you can figure out how to really dial them in. But even if you're a person who's just getting started and you don't have a budget for ads, the thing is, if you stop talking about your book, it will, and people stop talking. If you don't have a TikTok influencer who's out there talking about your book all the time, it's going to stop selling. It's going to stop selling. I talk to people all the time who are like, I sold all these books last month, and this month I have sold 0 books. And I say, when was the last time you posted about your book? And they're like, last month. When was the last time you emailed your list about your book? Last month. And I get it, because I don't want to bug people, and people don't want to be annoying, and they don't want to be self-indulgent and constantly be posting about themselves. But remember, again, it's a small percentage of your audience that's seeing every one of your posts. So if you're not doing something, whether it's posting or someone else is talking about your book or emailing or running an ad to your book, there are 42 million books on Amazon. No one remembers. Yeah.
It's funny. I'm thinking about Brad Listy as you're talking about that, because his most recent book is just really great. I'm so glad it took him as long as it did to write it, because what he finally ended up was brilliant. And it was one of those memoirs / novels that when you read it, you're like, that's me. I am that guy. And then suddenly all of this intense emotion latches onto him, and you're like, we got to be best friends. Like, that's how good that book was, is that I read it and I was like, he has to be my best friend. I love when that happens. And yet he is one of the most resistant people I've ever met to the idea of promoting his own book. He's pretty hardcore not into it. And I feel sad sometimes, because I'm like, that is a work of genius and I want everybody to see it. I don't know if I have a question exactly here, but I kind of just want to hear you reflect on this idea of like, we have to be able to do both things and be a little bit shameless about talking about the book or something. I don't know. I have to, should, I know those are bad words.
I know, right. And we can back off of that for a hot second, but it's, here's what's challenging, I think, is that so often authors are pretty humble people, and we're creative people, and we prefer, for the most part, to sit in the corner and create. And then it's like putting our child on the bus and saying, everyone, please be nice to my kid. Like, please like this book or my child, and then by extension, like me. It is an aspect of being an author that I don't think is talked about nearly enough. And even within the traditional publishing space, there's been a good bit of discourse, predominantly with the big 5, not necessarily with the smaller, more intimate publishing experiences, but with the big 5, where your book publishes and then you're just kind of cut off from everyone at the publishing house. Everyone, your editor, the marketing team, because their work is done. And now they're moving on to the next person in the queue. And you're kind of left there like, I don't have a support system. Like, what do I do? And I don't feel comfortable. I want you to promote my book. I want my house to publish or promote my book, or I want someone else to promote my book. And so I think it's a gradual process of becoming, there are some authors who are just very extroverted people, and they will walk up to you in the grocery store and be like, you want to buy my book? That's not me, but it's some people. And I think it's interesting over time to just get more comfortable, right? There are some ways to do it quietly. I leave books in airports whenever I travel. I just leave a book at different gates on a seat, on an empty seat, and it has a little note attached to the front that'll just say, like, if you found this, you're meant to have it. Enjoy it.
I love that.
People have left books in doctors' offices. Like there's a woman, her handle on Instagram is the Holistic Psychologist. She lives in Scottsdale, and she's, renowned. And she takes boxes of books to a big park in Phoenix and videotapes herself, by the way, doing it. And then it's like a scavenger hunt. So she's like, hey, I'm in Phoenix. I'm leaving all these books. Go get it. There are all kinds of ways that we can do it without having to put our face. Faceless marketing is all the rage, because people are like, I don't want to do my hair. I don't want to show my face. I don't want to do it. And there are some interesting ways to do it. There's no rule that says you have to be shameless every day in order. Brad Listy's a great example, by the way, because you telling me right now about Brad's book, I'm going to order it. And Brad didn't sell it. You did.
Yeah, that's very true. That's a great point. And honestly, that's got to be the most effective way that you can do anything. If you can get people to talk about your book, just because it's great and it connected with them, that's a huge win. And it seems to me that it's something you can't necessarily control, certainly not with any predictability.
You can't. And I'm as much a fan of control, or the idea of control, as anyone you've ever met. And I'm slowly accepting that I don't have any, right? Yeah. And so there's just this aspect of all this that's like, take the step, make the move, do the slightly uncomfortable thing. I'm not someone who's ever going to tell you, jump into 10 feet of water if you've never had a swimming lesson, right? I'm going to say, like, make it a little step at a time. And then there's this sort of surrender we have to have to the workings that we don't have control over, whatever you believe in, like spirit, source, universe, God, whatever it is. If you believe in a higher power, that something comes in and kind of moves things on your behalf. But we don't have control. We just don't. That could be a whole episode in and of itself.
Yeah. So I've had this weird experience, and I've thought about it a lot recently, due to just a little bit of hardship in my life. But I've had those moments where I'm like, you know what? It's time to throw the towel in. I have been making a sincere effort to do this for several decades now. And it's just not going to break my way. But then that thought, I realize, Jody, you're strangely built for suffering. Like, I can just take so much pain and so much suffering and continue to endure. And then I think I really haven't reached the bottom yet. So I'm wondering when that moment is, because everybody always says it's right when you're about to break that you get the big break. And I'm like, I'm not about to break. I'm being dramatic with myself right now. I can do this. I can keep doing this. Have you had moments in your career that have felt a little bit like breaking?
My God. Yeah. Yes. I wrote about one not infamously, but it's infamous to me, in my fifth book, Enough, which is all about like getting to enough, whatever the hell that is for each and every one of us. I had been working and doing all the things and buying all the courses and going through everything that they said to do. I did it all. And one day I got a notice on my phone from my bank, and this was about, I don't know, maybe 6 years ago. And it said, you have $2.37 in your checking account. And I thought, that can't be right. Like, there's been an egregious error. Something is very wrong. And so I logged into my account and I looked, and it was not incorrect. Like, I was down to $2, and I called a friend of mine and I just said, what I have 5 kids. So I was like, what am I going to do? And this friend said, number one, you've always figured it out. And I said, well, right, but that's not helpful right now. Like and then he said, number two, just get the fuck back to work. Like, have you never been broke before as an entrepreneur? And I said, well, not like this. I mean, are you telling me this is like a rite of passage? Because that sucks. Like, I don't think that. And, I turned it around, and I turned that in that particular instance, it turned around quite quickly. It doesn't always do that. I've had I probably had one yesterday where I was like, I'm done.
Yeah.
I'm done. I'm done with this. I'm going to go live on a farm and like raise goats. I don't want to do this anymore. And I think it's very common, to feel that way. And I also find within myself, there's great power in the decision, because I don't have to keep doing this. I mean, I could just go work at Starbucks, as I've always threatened to do. I could do any number of things, and I keep choosing this. And I don't think it's because I'm a masochist. I think it's because I genuinely love this industry. I love being an entrepreneur. I love helping people, all of it. So, the answer is yes.
Yeah. It's wild. And I think that there are a lot of people who do get to the point and they make the choice to hang up the towel, I guess, and do something else. And I think that a lot of those people, when they do, they feel relieved, which is somehow like an internal signal that you experimented with this thing that you thought you wanted, and you realized that the degree of hardship was not equal to the reward in the future that you assumed for yourself. Yeah. And so I kind of applaud the people who step back and just say, it's not for me. I wonder about the people like you and I, and me more than you, because I think you've experienced more reinforcing success at this point. But I wonder about us, that you're like, I'm going to keep doing this despite all the evidence to the contrary. And I'm really drawn to people who do what we do. I've always wondered, because one thing that I've heard a lot of times before is you can't lose if you don't quit. And I kind of wonder, you always hear that from people who have been successful, who have made it. And I sort of wonder, can you actually lose by not quitting just because like you can't hear the signals loud enough? You talked about the source and God and all of those kind of things. Is there ever an element where you explore what that looks like? I didn't expect the conversation to go this way, by the way. It's just, this is where we're sitting right now.
That's why I love having no plan. That's why I'm like, let's just go. So that's a really interesting question. And I guess my answer to that right now, thinking about it for 7 seconds, is it depends on whether you are answering that question from the external or the internal. So if the question is, can I lose if I don't quit, even if that means I'm living in an alley? Well, if I am in my right mind and content living in an alley, it's still grinding it out, then I haven't lost. If someone else in my world is saying, you are irresponsible, you are delusional, and I take that in, then maybe I've lost by not quitting. I mean, I think there's, because many times, like, I think entrepreneurs flock to entrepreneurs because we understand each other. We all have this crazy thing. Many entrepreneurs quit after a year or two, because to your point, it's like, this isn't, this person told me I could make $100,000 in a week. I'm not doing that. So I quit. Right. And then there's those of us who are maybe insane, and we just think, oh, but what if I did it this way? And for me, the reward is not always financial. In fact, I mean, we all need a certain thing to live and to pay our bills and et cetera. But I love trying to figure out what I can do that I didn't ever think I could do, because it's not, I mean, my undergrad my degree did not set me up for what I currently do. My upbringing did not set me up for what I currently do. So it's like, by all people have said to me, I'm the worst person ever to be an entrepreneur, because I don't really like uncertainty. I've got issues with money. I could have $7 million in the bank and I'd still be like, okay, well, this paper towel is $3 and this paper towel is $4. So let's analyze. I mean, I'm just, so I'm not the best candidate perhaps, but every time I say I'm going to quit, it's like, give me 2 days and I'm back in.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I had a situation where, so recently I was out selling books at the Chicago Printers Row, and it was a bad event. It was not a good match for me. I was there with 2 other guys. The booth was expensive, and it was just like everybody who came up was like, your book sounds great. Unfortunately, I don't have any money. And I was like, I'm dying right now because I'm used to making okay money doing these events, and I do them a lot. And so it was like a couple of things before that, then this event, and I'm driving out of Chicago on Sunday night, and I'm about an hour outside of the city, and my tire blows. It's dark outside. I have a blown tire. I've had a terrible event. I pull off to the side of the road. I call my wife, and I'm like, oh, I'm not going to be home tonight. My tire blew. I don't know how long it's going to take me to get it fixed. I don't have a tire iron in my car because we used it to fix hers not too long ago. It's just like a perfect storm. And once I get everything all resolved, like there was nothing particularly horrific about it, but it was the accumulation, and I got home and I said, babe, if we get to December and things haven't broken at least a little bit in my direction, I think it's time that I start considering a pivot. And maybe that doesn't mean I completely leave this behind, but maybe it just means that I go back and start contributing in a bigger way financially to the family or something. And it took all of about 3 weeks for me to be like, screw that, I'm holding out. It does, like, giving you a little bit of time to reflect back on things and realize we're very, very dramatic in the moment.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm very dramatic in the moment too. I'm like, screw this, I'm out. I'm done. But it's we just keep coming back.
Yeah. 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 So I want to talk to you now about a couple of things. I want to get wider outside of social media and maybe this feeling of frustration. You do a very specific thing through your courses and through the services that you offer. So this is your chance to kind of pitch what you do for the ideal person who's listening. And then also like frame it up, because I love some of the points you've made talking about what you do on other podcasts. And I think it's really helpful because a lot of people expect everything to just be super expensive.
I know. So this is it's a tough topic because there's always going to be an opinion about pricing. And it doesn't matter if we're talking about book coaching or publishing or shoes or cars, right? There's going to be an opinion about it. And we have to learn sort of to set that to the side a little bit. My goal has always been, I work by myself and I'm very transparent about that. I have a couple contractors who I partner with for cover design because no one wants me designing their cover, I promise. But beyond that, I don't have big overhead. It doesn't feel good in my body necessarily to charge people exorbitant amounts of money for things just because that's see the air quotes, going rate. So there are certain things that are more expensive. I mean, ghostwriting is an expensive thing. I'm not doing that right now, but it's a more expensive task to undertake. But for authors, it's interesting that you say the thing about when you did the event and people say, I don't have money right now. One thing I've had to accept in my life is that when people say to me, oh, your book looks great, I just don't have money right now. What they're saying is, I don't think I need this. It really does. Like, I'm saying it looks great to be nice to you, but I don't really think I need this. And the reason I know that is because I watch people. I have 2 kids who work at Starbucks, and they will tell me that people drive through and order $13 drinks. And my book is less than $13. So I know for the most part, it's not a financial issue. It's that they have to make a decision between all these different books that are available potentially, and yours or mine, mine isn't calling to them on that particular day. Fine. But what I want to do is make the book writing and publishing and long-term marketing process simple. Now, simple is not easy. And I've long been a firm opponent of I will never call anybody out or anything, because everyone has a right to run their business however they see fit. I am just not a proponent of showing results that took 12 years to get and portraying it as though, well, now, like, it took me 12 years to do this, so now I can teach you to do it in a week for $5,000 or even for $47. It's
Right.
These things aren't built in a week, period. So I just want to make the writing process more comfortable for people. I want people to better understand what really goes into it, which is why I have my podcast, so that other authors can come on and say, it took me 8 years. Like, what you're reading that you're so impressed by looked nothing like this the first time through. It was complete crap. And then the publishing process, I just really want to simplify that for people too. Writing and marketing, not linear. There are a lot of twists and turns in writing and marketing. Publishing, linear. It is step by step. It is truly the thing in the publishing space where if you say, if you do this, then this, then this, then this, you will have a professionally published book in your hands that then, of course, you have to go out and sell, right? But I want to make it fun. I love reading so much. I love books so much. I love stories so much. I know how many people want to share their stories and tell their stories and make up stories and share them with the world and entertain people. And they're so afraid of doing it for they all have the same fears. We all have the same fears. I have the same fears, even though I'm on book 7. And I just want to create a community of people where we can support one another and get those stories out there so that I can fill my bookshelf with them.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know?
But, talk to me just briefly about the gap right now between traditional publishing and self-publishing. What I really want to hear is, how do we know, or is there a different value ratio for a traditionally published book and a self-published book in terms of quality or the process to get it out there? What are the kinds of things that you're saying to the authors that you're working with in this regard? Because I think that we've come a long way to accepting self-publishing as a really viable way to put a book out into the world. And yet I still think that there are friends like my friend Jeff who won't even read my books just because they didn't get through the gatekeeper.
Okay, so there's 100% still a stigma, and it's so unfortunate, but it is what it is. And it's like a lot of other things in our society that are just taking way too long to become normal, right? Yeah. But indie publishing, which to me is self-publishing or hybrid publishing, meaning you hire someone to publish your book for you because you don't want to do all the legwork. It's the more air quotes again, but the more success stories we hear, like you talked about the gentleman earlier who sold 300,000 copies of his finance book. The more we hear that, right, the more we recognize what's possible. Now, whether you're talking about the indie space or the traditional space, that 1% is the 1%. They're outliers. So what I am passionate about is really helping to educate people about there are pros and cons of every publishing approach out there. I am agnostic when it comes to publishing approach. I am not, hey, everyone should self-publish. Everyone shouldn't self-publish. The challenge is that people think if I go with a traditional house, I'm going to get a big advance. I'm going to get all my marketing done for me. Those are the two big ones. And both of those are wildly untrue. And if you do get lucky enough to get a big advance, you don't have to pay it back if you don't earn it out, but the pressure on you to earn it out is absolutely there. So I feel like the stigma is still there, but the opportunities for indie authors are becoming so much more comparable to traditionally published authors that it's time that people start looking at it differently. Yes,
very much so. You see people, and I'm going to forget his name right now because I need it. Hous wrote the Wool series. And, he was so successful self-publishing that when he did eventually hand it off to the traditional publishers, he was able to dictate the terms of his contract.
Bingo.
Imagine. That would be wonderful. So I think
Well, Colleen Hoover is the same. I mean, you know, a lot of people are, that's become it's kind of like the old J.K. Rowling. It's become something that's getting tired, but Colleen Hoover is the same way. I mean, she still doesn't even traditionally publish everything. There's still some that she'll do indie, and there are still some that a publisher won't take. That's another big misconception, is that once you've sold a book to a traditional house, you have a traditional publisher for life. That is absolutely not true. I mean, I famously talked to Anne Garvin, who I absolutely love. She's written many novels, and she's with an Amazon imprint. And she said to me, I don't know if this is going to be my last book. Just because I write it doesn't mean that someone's going to buy it. I mean, for all I know, I'll self-publish at some point. So it's the misconceptions. It's the timeline on traditional publishing is notoriously long. It's years, you know, to get the book out. A lot of people want their book out sooner than that. And we have at our fingertips now the ability to produce a book that is the same in quality as a traditionally published book. We have access to the same cover designers, or at least designers of the same caliber, interior formatters, printers, all of that. Whether you choose print on demand or you do an offset run, you know, all of those things are possible as an indie author, and you retain control. So is it for everybody? It's not. I mean, I have a quiz on my website that'll help people determine, you know, which approach is best for you. And for some people, it ends up being traditional. But my goal is for someone to be confident with that, because to be sitting back going, well, this person says I should go traditional, and this person says I should self, and this person says I shouldn't release this at all, they will sit in inaction, and then no one reads the book. And that sucks.
Yeah. I think that tends to be the sad truth for most self-published books, but then people don't realize that also tends to be the truth for most traditionally published books. Is unless you're that top 1% author, you don't get any marketing dollars from your publisher. You don't get any kind of tour booked for you. You're out there doing it by yourself, and you're only getting a very small cut of any books that you're able to sell. So you have to be much more judicious about how you market it in the first place. But self-publishing, like you said, and I know your quiz will cover all of this stuff, is just, you have to be the entrepreneur you were talking about. You have to be the business person who has a plan on how you're going to get the book out into the world, and be willing to see all of your best laid plans kind of flop for the most part. I want to be conscious of your time. And so any closing remarks there, or something that we didn't cover, and then make sure to promote your podcast and everything that you're doing and how people can connect with you.
The last thing I'll say in response to what you just said is you can pivot. The beauty of it is you can pivot with indie publishing. And that is a pro of indie publishing. With traditional publishing, once the book is out of print, you're done, right? But with indie, you can keep pivoting. So if that's your personality and you want to be entrepreneurial about it and get creative, you can do that, which I love. Thank you for asking about the other stuff. My podcast is Write the Damn Book Already. And my website is publishaprofitablebook.com. And that's where all of my courses and programs and templates and workshops and all those things live. So I've done my best to make them truly like very accessible and not take 8 hours a day, because nobody has that.
Beautiful. I will send people to your podcast. I'm already an avid listener and have really enjoyed that. And yeah, I mean, this has been a real pleasure. Thank you so much for offering your time
so much
to the audience. Absolutely.
Becoming a household name won't happen overnight, but with your help, it can happen for me or for anyone you know who's on this journey. If you liked what you heard today, would you consider sharing this podcast with someone you know would love it too? Word of mouth is the single biggest difference maker for a dreamer's outcome. Thanks again for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.